The Great Depression, World War II, the decline of luxury ocean travel, and a global lockdown. The RMS Queen Mary has seen it all. It was very nearly an impossible dream just to bring this ocean liner into being. But out of the tribulation came a ship that would embody the hope, the bravery, and the spirit of the interwar generation. The White Star Line's RMS Titanic made famous the competitive rivalry between ocean liner companies and their insatiable desire to build bigger, faster, more luxurious ships. In 1929, the Cunard Line's biggest and fastest ship, the Mauretania, had lost the title of the world's fastest ocean liner, and though the global recession had slowed down ticket sales on passenger crossings, the British people had felt that either Cunard or White Star should construct the next champion to take back supremacy over the Atlantic. However, neither company was ready to invest that amount of capital. Considering the economic decline, it wasn't until the French line announced the construction of their newest ocean liner, which would dominate the competition, that Cunard finally gave in and announced that they too would construct a new liner. The intention was to design two ships so large and fast that they could provide weekly transatlantic service and allow the company to retire some of their older vessels. The engineers of John Brown Shipyard in Clydebank, Scotland, had finished most of the designs, and they constructed several 17-foot-long models of the ship that they would test in a water tank to simulate all manner of ocean conditions. Over 8,000 tests were performed until Cunard was finally satisfied with the plans, signing a $30 million contract with John Brown Shipyards on December 1, 1930, to construct what they called Job Number 534. 10 days later, workers began to lay down the keel. For over a year, construction continued as planned. As the steel girders and ribs of the hull were built ever upward, the economy continued to sink under the weight of the Great Depression. But the workers at Clydebank were still ahead of schedule and aiming for a launch date of May 1932. However, Cunard was suffering from low ticket sales, and any profits they made were quickly being absorbed by the costs of the new liner. On December 10, 1931, Cunard halted construction on the ship due to a lack of funds. Hull number 534 was one of the last Clydebank jobs that had continued during the Depression, and now that they had lost it, all work had ceased. The sudden silence that overcame the industrial town was stark and eerie. Sir Percy Bates, chairman of the Cunard Line, was receiving letters every day from citizens around Great Britain asking that he continue to work on Hull 534 and keep people working. Some letters even contained small contributions of money in hopes that any amount would save the liner. Sir Percy Bates assured the public that he would see the ship to completion. In the grip of the Great Depression, British families suffered. In Clydebank, shipbuilding was all the town could do, and without any work, there was virtually no way out of the nightmare. The occasional rumor stated that work on the ship would continue soon, but it became a vicious cycle that teased the hopes of those in need of a miracle. Prior to the halt on construction, the chairman of White Star Line, Walter Runciman, had pleaded with Cunard to merge with them so that both companies might survive the economic downturn. But White Star had an aging fleet of ships, and Cunard was reluctant to dilute their assets in a merger. As it turned out, Walter Runciman would later join Britain's Board of Trade, and when Cunard went to Parliament to request a government subsidy to finance the completion of Job Number 534, it was Mr. Runciman that influenced Parliament to agree on a loan under the condition that Cunard merges with White Star Line to consolidate their debts. Not to mention, during the First World War, ocean liners were very useful for transporting troops and supplies. Parliament knew that the new ocean liner would be a great asset if war broke out again. Cunard had been put in a tough situation because Sir Percy Bates had the much-needed support from the Prince of Wales, heir to the British throne, and didn't want to disregard it. On December 14, 1933, the merger was announced, and henceforth the company would be known as Cunard White Star. British Parliament would loan the company £9.5 million to complete the first ship and start the second one. Clydebank was abuzz with the roar of cheers and celebration on the morning of April 3, 1934, as 400 men marched down to the shipyard escorted by bagpipers. The men had to clear the hull of thousands of nesting birds and proceeded to scrape off nearly 130 tons of rust that had accumulated over the last 2 years. Soon the shipyard was in full swing, with 3,800 workers busy on construction. They were even visited by the Prince of Wales as the riveters hammered in the 10 million rivets that would hold the ship together. Getting the people back to work had become a symbol of optimism across the United Kingdom. It was only 6 months later when the ship was ready for launch, but a name had not been announced. It was kept secret, though the press had suspected the ship would be named after Queen Victoria. The day of the launch came on September 26, 1934. His Majesty King George V and his consort Queen Mary had arrived at the ceremonies. The king declared that 534 was the stateliest ship now in being. Queen Mary stepped up to the podium to announce the name of the ship and christen her. The crowd would gasp upon the grand reveal of the ship's name and then erupt in cheers.
I am happy to name this ship the Queen Mary. I wish this ship to her and all to sail in her.
As the ship went down the slipway, her hull was slowed down by 18 enormous bundles of drag chains, totaling 2,530 tons of weight, creating a cacophony of noise that excited the spectators. The hull slowed as it entered the water, dipping into it as graceful as a queen. Though her massive hull still managed to cause the water to jump the banks, it was said that hay farmers a half-mile away got their feet wet as the river flooded the fields. Next, the ship was being pulled by a tug to the fitting-out basin where her interiors and superstructure would take shape. Over 30 different British and American artists had designed and decorated the luxurious interiors. Her bulkheads and fittings were paneled in 56 different types of rare and exotic woods, and her interiors were separated into 3 different classes. Admittedly, first class had the most impressive public rooms, but no other ocean liner could compete with the second and third class amenities of the Queen Mary. After 18 months of fitting out, she was ready to leave the shipyards on her way to Southampton. As the tugs pulled her along the Clyde, they lost control and the ship ran aground, wedging itself across the river. This could have resulted in damage to her hull or propellers, delaying her departure, but after a complete inspection, she was deemed to be in good shape and was refloated. After her arrival in Southampton, she would embark on her 4 days of sea trials starting April 15, 1936, ensuring that she was ready for her maiden voyage. It was on these sea trials that the Queen Mary made her fastest achievable speed of 32.84 knots. Just 2 days prior to the maiden voyage, the royal family was invited to a ceremony honoring the ship's namesake, Queen Mary, the Queen Mother. The Prince of Wales was now the new King Edward VIII, and he was so enthralled with the ship, he walked nearly 7 miles around it, touring every room he could. On the promenade deck, Princess Elizabeth and Princess Margaret had tried out the first-class children's playroom, going down the slide, which Cunard would later name the Royal Slide. The day everyone had dreamed of for nearly 6 years had finally come. It was May 27, 1936, the day the RMS Queen Mary would embark on her maiden voyage. She was loaded up with 2,140 passengers and 1,100 crew members. Cunard had invited Henry Hall, the director of the BBC Dance Orchestra, to be among the first to sail aboard the ship and make him the co-director of the ship's orchestra. The king was there to see the Queen Mary off as she departed Southampton on her way to Cherbourg, France, then on to New York City. As the ship made its way west across the Atlantic to the United States, Cunard had already told its passengers that the Queen Mary would not be attempting to break the speed record and capture the title of the Blue Riband. They explained that the ship's engines still needed to be run in. The truth of the matter was that the ship was beset with vibration and soot was raining down from her funnels. But still, everyone had hoped Cunard was only building up the surprise. Henry Hall was proud to introduce a musical piece which he had written specifically for the Queen Mary, which he called Somewhere at Sea. As the music played, it was broadcast on air for the Western world to hear. He would also keep the public updated with the progression of the voyage each day.
A traveler who will build my life anew. He's out on
After 2 days, the ship slowed as it entered a fog bank, prompting the journalists on board to report that the ship would not be breaking the speed record. And as the Queen Mary passed the spot where Titanic sank, the crew tossed over a wreath of red roses in honor of those who lost their lives on the ill-fated vessel. Just 100 miles from New York, 3 planes flew over the ship as a salute, dropping a shower of carnations onto the decks in celebration. It was only a taste of the grand welcome to come. As she sailed up the Hudson River, the Queen Mary was flanked by an armada of small vessels. Fireboats launched a spray of water into the air, a decorative display fitting for the arrival of a queen. The Mary was carefully maneuvered into her new dock at Pier 90, a dock built specifically for her. And among the thousands of spectators who crowded the waterfront was President Roosevelt and Canadian Prime Minister Bennett. Though she was a British ship, she quickly became a household name to the Americans. Everyone around the world saw the ship as a triumph over the harsh throes of the Great Depression. It seemed building the Queen Mary would become a matter of impossibility. Yet here she was, floating in a dock thousands of miles from her home port. Today she lives out her retirement in the city of Long Beach, California, a ship that almost never was. Amid the grips of the worst economic downturn in Britain's history, she was hammered into existence by the hard-working Scots of the River Clyde.